Good morning, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are, YouTube. So, heading through this little lovely country lane again must mean one thing: it's MOT time, this time on the Ducati. As mentioned before, I'm a member of a group called Motovlog Alliance. Check them out on motovlogalliance.com, www.motovlogalliance.com, of course. They also have an app on Discord. They also have a Titan Discord app, so if you're on Discord for gaming, or for any reason, check out Motovlog Alliance on there as well. With the Motovlog Alliance, every month they have a monthly video challenge, monthly vlog challenge. And this is a great opportunity, because this month's challenge is to review your bike. And, well, I've had this Ducati now for 6 years, so I've got a really good picture of what the ownership is like. So realistically, this is coming from a point of having done quite a few miles on this. It's barely 20,000 miles on it, it's now 26,300. And realistically, it's an interesting bike. I've come, as most people my age have done, on a diet of purely Japanese bikes. All I've ever ridden before I owned this bike. In fact, before I owned this one, the only Italian bike I'd ever ridden was a couple of Italian 125s, and that's for very brief periods of time. So realistically, what did I expect? What did I get? Well, it's a funny one. I've had Italian cars, and they tend to be a love it or hate it thing. When they're good, they're very, very good. When they're bad, they're rubbish. And by comparison to a Japanese bike will do 90% of what you want 99% of the time. You can take a CBR 600, it will be perfect in just about every situation, or very close to. You can do everything from a track day to a European tour on one. Italian bike's not quite the same. I mean, this bike is, in its day, was relatively sporty. The Super Sport was always the slightly more affordable sports bike part of their range, but they're always relatively sporty, and it is a very hands-down, bum-up position. The clutch is fairly heavy. It's a hydraulic dry clutch, so you get that lovely characteristic Ducati clutch rattle as well, which is nice. Or it might be horrible, depending on your viewpoint. That's also one of the polarising things. But it's not a comfortable bike at all, really, but especially not at low RPM and low speeds. It's not quite as vibey as you'd expect, although it's not exactly the smoothest bike in the world, and it does ride fairly firmly. However, the suspension is completely adjustable, absolutely everywhere. You've got preload, bump and rebound damping at both ends, so you've got good adjustability. It comes as standard with excellent shower suspension. And incidentally, there was also a cut-down version of the Super Sport a little later in the bike's life called the Sport. And many people don't spot the differences, but they are, in a little way, quite different. The Super Sport has the fully adjustable shower suspension. So you've got, spot the adjusters at the top of the fork legs, that denotes a Super Sport, or at least a Sport that's been super sported. The Sport doesn't. The Sport just has flat fork tops and has no adjustability in the suspension. It was a way of cutting down the cost. Ducati were using these as run-out models, so they had a little bit of trouble shifting the facelifted version like this. So that was a way of knocking the price down, and the last few were knocked at extremely competitive prices. Don't discount them, they're still a great bike and a lot of fun for the money, but ultimately you want the full Super Sport to get the best possible experience. One of the few other changes, after the year 2000, I think the riding position was a bit too harsh for most. So from the year 2000 onwards, small rigs were put under the clip-ons just to raise them up a little bit and give the riding position just a little bit of a less aggressive feel. But these earlier bikes were the full fat, low riding position, heavy clutch, high pegs, and I don't think any the worse for it. This is their natural territory, these sort of B roads and back lanes, because the motor's so enormously torquey. It really does pull from almost nothing. I mean, if you don't know the road, it's a brilliant bike to ride, because you can just kind of leave it in third, roll on and off, and get all the performance in the world. I mean, we're sitting here at 3,000 RPM, and then right away it responds in a way that a four-cylinder bike just wouldn't. And also, when you're riding in these sort of roads, the ergonomics don't come into play so much. But of course, we're getting here at 4,000 RPM. If we give it a little squirt after the corner, you'll see that it really does pick up really quite nicely. Even this uphill section, we've got no problems at all. We're pulling quite comfortably without any effort at all on a very small width of throttle. But it's not a bike you're going to find will work in every situation. In town, Your left thigh gets cooked by the exhaust pipe running under the seat. The rear cylinder obviously exhausts backwards and downwards, but that exhaust does create a lot of heat. You'll find the clutch gets grabby and noisy when it's warm, and you'll also find that the clutch is just heavy and just generally doesn't like going slow. It's also not good for the life of the clutch. The clip-ons will become a real pain. The seat is nothing like as padded as it looks. It looks like it's quite a deeply padded seat, but of course the trick they play with it is that it's just simply curved, so the padding is very, very thin. So these bikes, these Italian bikes, when you're on the road they love, are tremendous. When you're on the road they hate, they are awful. So realistically, you've got to ask yourself what you're going to do with it. Are you going to use this bike as your everyday transport? If the answer to that is yes, and you really want the Ducati experience, have a look at the ST2, ST3, ST4 range. They're going to be a much better proposition. But if you've got a bike, you just want a bike for a sunny day, the Supersport range is great. At the moment, prices are just starting to creep up, and the injected models are probably one of the best bargains out there in the Ducati world at the moment. So what are the negatives and positives of the 900 SS? The idiot lights could be a little bit brighter. It's quite easy to leave your indicator on. Obviously comfort, as we discussed, is probably the main one as a downside, but then you don't buy a bike like this for comfort. And they do like to be kept very well in tune and looked after, so things like chain tension are very critical. Chain tension, tyre pressures make all the difference between a bike that rides properly and one that doesn't. These run happily enough on standard 95 unleaded. That's obviously for our US viewers, that is RON, not MON. But I tend to prefer to use 98. Just seems that little bit happier on it, especially at low speed, seems a little smoother. So frankly, if the cost of a few pence between regular and super unleaded is a factor, they might not be the bike for you. While they're not prohibitively expensive to maintain, they certainly don't run on fresh air. Fuel consumption is absolutely fantastic, believe it or not. Unless you're really hooning it, you're typically looking on the high 40s or low 50s. I mean, right now, riding along at 60 miles an hour, we're probably doing about 55 miles per gallon, which is frankly exceptional. Part of that comes just pure fact that there's not much weight to pull along. So there's not so much fuel. They do give chains quite a hard time. There's a lot of torque in the engine, and of course it comes in a very pulsy form. So pay good attention to chains and sprockets, because they'll set you back about £120 if you need to replace them. And again, they're quite good for squaring off tyres for that same reason. So you can easily spend £500 replacing all the consumables. The brakes are excellent. They're the same ones as fitted to the 916, which in their day, straight off the showroom floor, were good enough to race. So you've got no problem stopping. I mean, it is a one-finger stop on this bike, and generally they're very easy to ride. But it's definitely a bike that most people will think is more scary to own than it actually is. So if you're looking for something different and you're looking for a very sporty ride, have a look at one of these. Or you can get the ST2 or ST3, which is a slightly softer chassis and a great all-rounder bike and great for touring. So a little bit different, a little unusual, definitely not to be sniffed at. Front brakes on the SS are straight off the 916, so plenty of stopping power courtesy of Brembo Goldline calipers. The Italian parts bin was well at work here. The indicators and the mirrors are exactly the same as the Laverda, and found on numerous other bikes, including the BMW F650, so again, no problem getting hold of them and no extortionate prices to pay. Rear suspension is a single cantilever monoshock, made by Showa, very effective and very simple. The bearings can wear, but they're very simple to replace. Almost all of these bikes are now going to be wearing aftermarket exhaust systems. This has got a slip-on and link pipe system from Scorpion, which is part of the Krapovic Corporation, but you'll find many, including Arrow and Terminioni. Terminioni systems are the Ducati preferred ones at this era, so they do tend to add a little bit of value and desirability onto the bike. Generally, the other problem you're going to find with these, the paint on the engine can flake a little bit. This one's not too bad,
but other than that, the general finish of the bike is surprisingly sturdy. Keep an eye out for the fuel hoses. It is a fuel injected bike. They do run at quite high pressure, so if they're looking any way dodgy, do get them checked and changed. Other than that, the general bike is very easy to live with, generally reliable. Just keep an eye out for rust in the fuel tank. It is a bit of a problem with these, and it's another good reason to use super unleaded, just so there's no ethanol in there.
One of the advantages of the injected SS over the previous carbureted versions is it does hot start a lot better. Been sat here about 10 minutes, which would be a really tough start with the carbureted bike, but no problem at all with injection. When really heat soaked, they can be a slightly harder start than that, but if you're having real trouble starting it, take the earth lead off the engine, clean it all up, and don't forget the mount that the earth lead goes onto also itself screws into the engine. So don't just take the earth lead off at that point, undo the big hex underneath it. Clean it all up, give it a good liberal smear of silicone grease, and you'll find your hot starts are much easier. I also thoroughly recommend the Motovlog batteries, which give a good old kick of current to get that big old twin turning over. If you like these videos, do hit like and subscribe button. There's plenty more coming up. We're heading in for our inspection now. I'm fairly sure she's going to go through, but of course that's really down to the tester. There might be something I've missed. I'm not perfect, not by a long stretch of the imagination. But do hit the like and subscribe button. Let me know what you think. Are you intrigued by the ownership of Italian bikes? Do you think that these nice grouchy old Ducati twins might be just the bike for you? Let me know. Hit the comment section if you want to know that. Hit the thumbs up, and speak to you soon.